thing to do when pulling a handle is to get some clay ready. And so I'm just going to open some off here. I only have a couple handles to make right now, so I'm going to grab about a pound and a half of clay or so. You want to make sure that you have a nice, compacted, well-wedged piece of clay to work with. So I'm going to take this that was vacuum power mixed. So it's already been wedged, and then I'm just going to do a little bit of wedging on this. I'm doing a spiral wedging technique so that I create this the shape where it's wider on one side and more narrow on the other. And in this particular case, it's going to help because that's the shape we're going for to start making a handle. So I'm going to wedge it a few times, and then I'm just going to roll it up so that I get rid of that bit of clay that's hanging off. And now this is the shape that we're going for. You just use my hands to kind of shape it a little bit more. Okay, now we've got our handle carrot started, and this is the mug over here that we're going to pull the handle for. So I just used my right hand on top of the carrot to kind of shape the top, which is where I'll hold onto it with my right hand, and then I'm going to use my left hand to pull it. So before I start pulling, I kind of just use my hands to shape the carrot a little bit longer, and this kind of sets it up to get it to be more of the correct shape before introducing water to it and making it extra wet. So we'll get that shape started, and now directly above the bucket of water, I'm going to start by just getting my hand wet and applying that water to the surface of the piece. The majority of the pulling is done with your thumb and your finger in that kind of shape, and it starts with the width of the piece of clay that you're pulling, and then you just keep changing the shape of your hand, making that hole smaller and smaller, and then as you get down to the more finished diameter of the handle, you can actually play with the shape of your hand a bit to make your signature handle shape. Pulled handles take quite a while to master, to get an idea, to even get decent at it if you're just starting. And as you do, through the practice of pulling, you're going to do this over and over and over again, and the shape of your hand reflects the shape of the handle. So it ends up being an artist's signature pulling the handles. Just giving my arm a little break here. It is a little taxing on your arm muscles to hold the clay like this. You might be able to find another way to support the clay if you're not able to hold it. For the time being, I'm able to hold it, so I just kind of do it that way. So I've got the handle shape started here. I want to go, I'd say right now it's about an inch in diameter, and I want to get that closer to ½ inch in diameter, so about half the thickness that I have right now before I attach it to the mug and finish there. So at this point I have a nice smooth shape of the handle all the way around, and my finger and thumb, where I'm putting the majority of the pressure to pull, have developed a coating of slip, which makes it a little bit easier to slide my hand from the top down the piece. And every time I'm doing this, I'm controlling my finger and my thumb. I'm closing that in slightly. So in a big way, you're in control of how much pressure you're putting onto this coil as you pull down and shape this handle blank. Getting water on my hand often, I do actually end up scraping off some of that slip. There's still some on there, but sometimes it just gets a little bit too much. And what I want to do when I hold this is I'm putting some pressure with my hand, And as I'm bringing my hand further down to the bottom, I'm putting more and more pressure. So I'm squeezing just a little bit harder, and I'm trying always to have the shape with it widest at the top and then a nice gentle taper down to the bottom. A lot of times what will happen is at the bottom, your hand will squeeze together and then release pressure right at the bottom. It's not happening right at this moment, but there will be like a little ball at the bottom, and it's good to just kind of clip off extra clay anytime you need. So if you're pulling it, see if I can get it to do it on purpose. If I pull it and I put a little bit too much pressure right there at the bottom, and that just happens with sometimes with the natural way things go, you want to stop what you're doing when you see something like that and cut that off, because if you just pull right over top of that, it's going to be a disconnect in the surface that's going to you release pressure as you go over it, and then you grab onto that ball at the end and it pulls it a little bit more, and it can actually cause issues up here in the handle. So anytime you get something like that, just break that piece off and keep pulling. If you're learning how to pull, this is a good exercise to do over and over again. Before you commit to actually putting a handle onto a cup, you may want to practice making some of these carrots in the beginning first. When you're learning, just keep going over and over again. Sometimes it helps to go from the bottom to the top when you're learning, to kind of feel how the clay is changing as you pull it every time. And this is one of the steps that's early on in the process where you can practice over and over again and not worry about starting over. And it doesn't have to be perfect, because it's not a finishing step in the process. So if you can learn how to move the clay from the wad of clay that you get off the bag to this thicker diameter handle starter, then you'll be that much more prepared when you get to the finishing stage of applying the handle to the mug, which is next. Every time I'm doing this, I'm turning the piece a little bit. So I hold it straight while I pull down the handle, and then I'll turn the piece of clay a little bit, then I'll pull my hand straight down again, and I'll turn it. So I'm always turning it about a quarter to a half a turn every time, so that I don't have to move my left hand around. I keep that in the same place, and I turn the clay, and that gives me a nice rounded diameter. Again, if I don't do that, then it takes on the shape that my hand makes. And so to keep that even, I'm turning the clay each time that I pull. Okay, so that looks like about the right diameter now for me to put this on this mug. I'm going to leave my bucket of water and just lay this down on the table right in front of me. Scrape my hand off. I'm going to use a towel to clean off my hand now so that I have dry skin to handle the clay. If I leave that moisture on there and I'd slip and then I pick up the mug, or I'm touching the handle, it's more likely to slip and cause a mess. So the first thing I'll do is get the mug prepared for the handle, and in this case the mug body has been trimmed already. You want to trim or finish the bottom however you're going to before you apply the handle, and it's leather hard. This is still a little on the soft side. If I bend it, it will go oval shape a little bit. Normally I try not to do that, but that's a good gauge of how stiff your piece is. You can apply a handle to leather hard clay from this stage a little bit softer and even a little bit drier. But as it gets drier, you want to keep in mind that you're adding very wet clay in this process where you pull the handle from the mug. So you want your mug to be a little bit on the wetter side. If this is dry, then you have to take extra precaution against cracking, because the leather hard clay has already dried and shrunk a little bit, and this very wet handle clay will have to catch up to that moisture consistency, and in that process it's going to shrink slightly differently. So that means slow it down drier, when you do this, you want to really take care when it's drying and slow it down. Okay, so I'm just going to cut the very end of this off, and then I'm guessing, I'm looking at this, this is probably about 3 inches or so of this pulled coil that I want to use. And I want to remember which side I cut closer to the handle, because as I make this mug, I want to have it widest at the top here, and the handle tapering down to the bottom. So I want to remember that I cut this side that was by the clay that I was holding, means it's slightly wider, so that's going to be the top of my handle. So now I'll go back to what I said was going to be the first thing, which was marking the handle marks on this mug. I just have a scoring tool on the end of this needle tool here, and I'm going to make this mark at the top, just about 1/4 of an inch down from the top of the lip of the mug, and that is an aesthetic decision. In other words, you need to think about where that placement is going to be and make that mark there on purpose. You could have it attach right at the very top. You could attach it 1 inch from the lip. There's a number of ways to look at it. So I got the top marked, and now what I'll do is visually look from the top down to the bottom and line that up. And again, if I want this handle to go from here all the way to the bottom, or if I want it to stop somewhere, I think I'll bring it down to just about the same amount of space from the bottom of the foot to the bottom of the handle as I have from the top of the lip to the top of the handle there. So now I can take my handle blank, and I'm going to remember which side was slightly wider, use that as the top. Now I'm going to take my thumb and finger and wrap all the way around the top of this handle, and then just pat slightly down on the top. And what I'm trying to do is widen it just even a little bit more by tapping down. I'm really not putting too much pressure. I don't want to dent the handle. I want it to be fairly flat, so I'm not really widening it much. And I'm also trying not to put too much pressure with my hands here, where I'm going to indent the shape of the handle. So after tapping it, I'm going to use the scoring tool and score in the middle. Get a bunch of texture on there. Now I dip my finger in the water bucket and just trace around the outside of the top of the handle, and that's plenty of water, and that's going to help seal the handle onto the mug. And this first connection is really important. You need to make sure that the top of the handle is going to be really well secured when you're pulling it. So I start by tilting the handle back a little bit and apply the bottom first, and then as I press up on the clay, I'm going to move back and forth a little bit with my left hand to wiggle the clay, get those score marks really work together. Now I'm supporting the whole of the handle with my hand as I grab onto it to get enough pressure to push the clay against the mug, and I've got a finger on the inside of the mug so that I can get this really pushed together without, if I grab it right here and I push, I'm going to indent the clay. So holding on to the entire piece of clay while I push that on there helps me maintain the width tapering down from the top to the bottom. And I'm going to take plenty of time to attach this. I just want to barely blend the edge together. The goal is to make it look like the piece of clay is being kind of pulled from, the piece of clay for the handle is being pulled from the body of the mug. So I want to be sure not to indent that area right here while I'm smoothing this and making this connection, which is a really easy thing to do. I like to hold the mug upright like this to get to the bottom of it. That also ensures that when I pull this handle, I'm going to be pulling it off of the mug like this. If I attach it with the mug sitting down like this, the gravity makes the handle kind of go down, and so sometimes you can attach your handle blank heading
down already, and that messes with the curve, which is the other aesthetic choice that you're making, or the next aesthetic choice where it's attached. Then you're going to pull this handle and deal with the curve. How far out do you want the handle to come from the body of the mug? Thinking about how many fingers can get in there, 2 or 3, and think about your fingers up and down, but also side to side. How far out do you need to hold on to this mug? Okay, so that's pretty well attached. And you can watch that attachment as you start to pull the handle. Sometimes you can see it pulling away a little bit there, and you just want to stop and reattach it. So now this first bit, I'm going to get my whole hand wet so that I have a lot of water on my skin, and then I'm going to just really gently apply. I'm applying the water to the outside first, and now as I can feel no friction on the clay, I know that I have enough moisture now to pull it. This is where your skill of pulling and tightening your grip as you get closer to the bottom and your control over that comes into play more. It's also where you want to start thinking about the shape of your handle. And normally what I'll do is like a rectangular kind of shape with my fingers, and I'll use my thumb knuckle to push in from the bottom, and sometimes I can use my knuckle right here where my pointer finger meets my hand, and I can push a little groove in at the top if I decide. So the key here is every time I go to pull again, I want to make sure that I get my thumb and my finger touching the mug as close as possible, which is going to help it from having an indent form right there. And in this case, I can hold the mug with my hand. I'm able to wrap all the way around it. Sometimes I need to support the mug from underneath if it's a little bit too wet. So that's another thing for you to consider as you're pulling a handle like this, is how can you hold the mug. I've actually seen this done before where the mug sits in front of you and you use your hands and you pull while the mug is sitting on the table, and that might be an option for you if you don't feel like you can hold the cup. This has always been easiest for me, and so for the last 20 years or so I've been pulling handles like this. So now get the final shape down, and this is again, anytime you're getting extra length at the bottom, just break that off. Now what I can do is start to play with the look and the shape of this, and if I get it close, I can decide now if I've removed enough thickness from the handle here. So this looks pretty all right. So let's see. So now I'm at the bottom of the score marks where I'm going to attach the handle at the bottom, and I just want to press my finger in to the outside to smush that wet clay into those score marks. And this is another part where your craftsmanship comes into play. How do you want to attach this bottom to the mug? With this old style of handle, my goal is to have it look like it's really well attached, kind of pulling from the top, and then it's stuck onto the bottom. So I like to have a little bit of definition there. You can take your time and smooth this in a little bit. Doing this final attachment, you can touch it a little bit. If you need to, you can touch up the interior curve. You can kind of mess around with the outside of the handle by smoothing it a little bit like this. But in general, what you're trying to do is go through the whole process of pulling, attaching, and it's a way to capture the fluidity of the clay while it's very wet. So ideally, you get it done when it's very wet, your movement is in your pulling and your attaching, and then you stop. And then maybe after it's leather hard, you can do a little bit of smoothing. But if you find yourself fussing around a lot with it at this point, you might consider just cutting off the handle and redoing it again. It's a lot like becoming proficient on the potter's wheel. Pulling a handle this way is about repetition and muscle memory and doing it over and over again. So back at this part of the process. Give yourself plenty of practice. Maybe just do that as an exercise. When you do one handle, maybe plan on pulling 2 or 3 so that you can get the best one. And there you have it.